The Galactic Enforcement Bureau, Sector 9, Outpost Voss 6, Year 208-47 of the Unified Dominion Calendar. Or, as the humans would say, a Tuesday. My name is Draven Kallox, Senior Intelligence Officer, 3rd Claw Division, assigned to the monitoring and containment of what our superiors lovingly classified as Category 7 irregularities, which is, if you ask anyone with half a functioning brain lobe, just a very bureaucratic way of saying humans who have somehow become everyone else's problem. I had been doing this job for 11 cycles. 11. I had catalogued Varathi war criminals. I had tracked Zulkeen smuggling rings that spanned 4 star systems. I had once spent 8 months pursuing a Drelcone arms dealer who could shapeshift into furniture, and somehow none of that, absolutely none of it, had prepared me for the morning my commander, Admiral Sovrak 10, slid a file across the briefing table and said, with the particular exhaustion of a man who had stopped questioning the universe a long time ago, "Her name is Mara Voss. Go get her." I picked up the file. I put it back down. I picked it up again slowly, because I was clearly hallucinating. The file on Mara Voss was, and I want to be precise here, 462 pages long. For context, the file on the Drelcon arms dealer had been 23. The file on the last human we had formally processed for intergalactic interference was 40 pages. And that man had accidentally caused a diplomatic incident by eating the sacred ceremonial bread of the Horan Council, which he had assumed, with characteristic human confidence, was just a snack bowl. 462 pages. On one woman. "She is not armed," said Admiral 10, which I think he meant to be reassuring. It was not. "She has no augmentations, no military background, no known alien allies. Her occupation on her homeworld registration is listed as..." He paused, consulted his notes, and said the word like it had personally wronged him. "Librarian." "A librarian," I repeated. "A librarian," he confirmed. 462 pages, I said. 463, actually. We added an appendix last night. I looked at the file. I looked at 10. I looked at the file again. What did she do? And then Admiral Sovrak 10, a decorated officer with 40 years of field experience, a man who had negotiated treaties with species that communicated exclusively through subsonic vibrations, a man who had once stared down a Grethkai warlord without blinking, leaned back in his chair, folded all 4 of his hands together, and said, "That is the problem, Kallox. We are not entirely sure." The target was located on Prism Station, a mid-tier trading hub orbiting a gas giant called Yulan Mar, out past the rim of what polite society considered properly governed space. Prism Station was the kind of place where everyone minded their own business, not out of courtesy, but out of survival instinct. The kind of place where questions were expensive and answers were more expensive than that. Mara Voss had been living there for approximately 4 standard months. She had a modest unit on level 7, which was the civilian residential block. She paid her dock fees on time. She was by all surface-level accounts completely unremarkable, and yet, the Drelcon Merchant Syndicate had specifically requested she be removed from Prism Station. So had the Varathi shipping conglomerate. So had, and I want you to sit with this for a moment, the Horan Council, who had only 6 months ago been furious enough about their sacred bread incident to issue a standing diplomatic protest against the entire human species. They were now apparently on the same page as the humans' other enemies, united in their singular desire to see Mara Voss gone. When your enemies start agreeing with each other, you either have a very effective diplomat or a very effective disaster. The file suggested, in careful bureaucratic language, that it might be both simultaneously. I took Officer Zenva Betrayal with me. She was young, sharp, and had the particular energy of someone who still believed that situations had straightforward explanations. I found that optimism useful. Occasionally, mostly it just made me feel old. "She looks normal," said Zenva, studying the photo in the file as our shuttle docked at Prism Station's lower bay. "They always do," I said. "She looks..." Zenva tilted the photo slightly, as though a new angle would reveal something. "She looks like someone's grandmother." "She is someone's grandmother." Page 212. "Her grandchildren are listed in a threat assessment. They are mentioned." The Bureau was being thorough. Zenva put the file away, and I could see her recalibrating, the way young officers do when they realize that the job is stranger than the academy prepared them for. Good. Better now than in the field. Prism Station smelled like recycled air, engine oil, and the particular sharp tang of Breckley spice traders. The corridors on level 7 were narrow and perpetually half-lit, the lighting strips on a maintenance cycle that the station's management had clearly decided was not their priority. I had been in worse places. I had also been in better ones, and I found myself fondly remembering them as we located Unit 7 Fallow 12 and knocked. We waited. We knocked again. The door opened, and there she was. Mara Voss was, in the physical sense, exactly what the file had described. A human female of later years, average height for her species, grey hair worn loose to her shoulders, wearing what I could only describe as a truly extraordinary quantity of layered fabric that still somehow looked comfortable. She had reading glasses perched on her nose, attached to a small chain around her neck. She was holding a mug of something that steamed gently in the recycled air. She looked at us. Zenva and I were in full bureau uniform, identification bands active, rank insignia visible, the kind of official appearance that was designed to convey authority the moment someone opened a door. Mara Voss looked at us the way you might look at unexpected rain. Not alarmed, not worried, just mildly noting that the rain had arrived. "Oh," she said pleasantly. "You're from the bureau. Come in then. I've just made tea." She had made tea, for herself and for guests, it emerged, because there were 3 mugs on the small counter near what passed for a kitchen in a level 7 residential unit. 3 mugs. She had known we were coming. She had made exactly the right number of mugs. I filed that information in the part of my brain labeled concerning, and sat down across from her at a table that was covered, almost entirely, in books. Actual printed books, the kind humans apparently still made despite having access to digital formats. Stacked in a system that looked chaotic but probably I suspected was not. "You're Mara Voss," I said. "I am," she agreed cheerfully, handing a mug to Zenva, who accepted it with the automatic politeness of someone whose brain had not yet caught up with the situation. "Senior Intelligence Officer Draven Kallox, Bureau 3rd Claw Division. Ma'am, we are here on behalf of the Galactic Enforcement Bureau to request your cooperation in an ongoing investigation." "Of course you are," she said, sitting down, wrapping both hands around her own mug. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe that your activities on Prism Station have caused significant I glanced at Zenva, who was no help. "Disruption." Mara Voss smiled. It was a warm smile, the kind that might belong to someone who had just heard a mildly amusing story about a neighbor's cat. She ran her fingers slowly through her hair, tucking a loose strand behind one ear, and said, "Have they been complaining again?" "Multiple parties," I confirmed, "have filed formal requests for your relocation. The Drelkan Syndicate, the Vorathi Conglomerate, and the Horan Council." She listed them in the same tone someone might use to read a grocery list. Zenva and I looked at each other. "How did you?" Zenva started. "Because those are the 3 groups I have been causing trouble for," said Mara Voss simply. "Were there others?" "I did have a small disagreement with a Breckley port inspector last week, but I thought that had resolved itself. I opened my mouth and then I closed it, and then I opened it again. Ma'am, we are not here to discuss who complained. We are here to formally arrest me," she said. Not with fear, not even with defiance, with the mild, interested tone of someone checking whether they had understood the plot of a film correctly. "Escort you," I said carefully, because the Bureau had very specific language guidelines, and arrest triggered a 40-page protocol document that nobody in the field had time for questioning. Mara Voss nodded slowly. She took a sip of her tea. She looked out the small, scratched viewport beside her table, where the slow roll of Yulin Mars clouds turned amber and rust in the light of the local star. She looked entirely serene. She looked, I thought, with a rising sense of professional unease, like someone who had very calmly done the math and was satisfied with the numbers. "All right," she said, "let me get my coat." She stood up, she went to the other room, and because she was a human woman of late middle age who had just agreed to come with the authorities and offered us tea, I did not follow her, because nothing in my 11 years of field experience had put a protocol in place for this specific situation. Zenva leaned toward me and whispered, "This is fine, right? This seems fine." "I genuinely do not know," I whispered back. Mara Voss came back wearing a long coat, still carrying her mug of tea, with a small bag over one shoulder that clinked faintly when she moved. She paused at the table of books, selected one and tucked it under her arm. "Ready," she said brightly. I stood. Zenva stood. We walked out into the corridor of Level 7 Prism Station. The Bureau's 2 most senior field officers in the sector, and one retired human librarian in a very comfortable coat. And somewhere in the back of my mind, in the part that had been trained for 11 years to recognize when a situation was about to become much more complicated, a small alarm was beginning to sound. Not loudly, just a quiet, insistent little warning. The kind that sounds right before everything changes. We were halfway to the docking bay when Mara Voss said, conversationally, as though commenting on the weather, "You know, I should warn you, the Drelcon group has people on this station. They've been watching my unit since last week." I stopped walking. "You knew?" "Of course I knew," she said, with the gentle patience of someone explaining something to a child. "I also know they have a contact in your own bureau, though I imagine that will surprise you more than it surprises me." She took another sip of her tea. The corridor suddenly felt much longer, and the small alarm in the back of my mind got a little bit louder. The corridor of level 7 had 17 security cameras. I know that because Mara Voss told me, casually, while we were still standing frozen in the middle of it, processing the information she had just dropped on us like a rock through a glass ceiling. She pointed them out one by one, the way a tour guide might indicate points of interest in a mildly boring museum, and then she added, still in that same pleasant, unhurried voice, that 4 of them had been replaced with dummy units 3 days ago, and that the blind spots they created formed a very convenient path between our current position and the secondary docking bay on the station's east side. "As opposed to the main docking bay," she said, "where I suspect your shuttle is." "Our shuttle is in the main docking bay," confirmed Zenva, who at this point had given up pretending she was in control of the conversation and was simply accepting information as it arrived. "Right," said Mara Voss. "Then we should probably not go that way. I had a protocol for ambushes. I had a protocol for informant interference. I had a protocol, somewhere in the 300-page Bureau Field Manual, that I had technically read and practically forgotten, for situations involving compromised equipment and third-party interference. What I did not have, what no protocol had ever thought to include, was a procedure for when the civilian you had come to escort began tactically redirecting your extraction route while finishing a mug of tea." "How?" I said, very slowly and with great care. "Do you know about the cameras?" Mara Voss looked at me over the rim of her mug. Her eyes, I noticed properly for the first time, were an unusual shade for a human. Not grey, not blue, something in between, the color of the sky on a planet right before a storm rolls in. Calm on the surface, absolutely loaded with potential underneath. "I read," she said simply. "You read?" I repeated. "The station's maintenance logs are publicly accessible if you know which subdirectory to look in. The camera replacement work orders were filed under routine upkeep, but the serial numbers of the replacement units are in a different registry than the originals, and the model codes correspond to units that stopped being manufactured in this sector 6 years ago, which means they came from somewhere else, which means someone brought them here specifically." She paused. "Also, the Drelcon operative on level 4 has been walking past my unit 4 times a day for the past week, which is 3 times more than anyone else on that level, and he always takes the same route, which avoids every functioning camera. People think consistency is safe. It is not. Patterns are loud." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture, the kind you could press your fingers into. Zenva, very quietly, said, "She is terrifying." "She is standing right here," said Mara Voss pleasantly, "and we are wasting time. Follow me, please. Here is something they do not teach you in the Bureau Academy. There is a specific, deeply uncomfortable feeling that comes with following the person you came to escort through a space station you are supposed to know better than them, based on information they should not have, toward a destination they chose. It sits somewhere between professional humiliation and a grudging, entirely unwanted admiration. I experienced every dimension of that feeling during the 12 minutes it took Mara Voss to lead us through a maintenance corridor, a storage transit tunnel, and a service lift that required a code she typed in from memory, to the east secondary docking bay. The bag over her shoulder clinked again when she moved. I kept glancing at it. She kept not explaining it. "The contact in our bureau," I said, because I was not able to let that particular piece of information simply sit quietly in the corner where she had left it. "You said you know who it is." "I have a strong suspicion," she said, stepping neatly over a floor conduit without looking down. "I could be wrong, but I am usually not, with these things." "Who?" She glanced back at me with an expression that was almost fond. "I will tell you when we are somewhere that does not have a functioning audio pickup on the east wall." She nodded at the corridor wall without slowing her pace. I looked at the wall. I looked back at her. Zenva grabbed my arm and pulled me forward before I could stop and stare at the wall for the considerable amount of time I felt I needed. The secondary docking bay was quieter than the main one. 3 ships. 2 were cargo haulers with Brickley registration. The third was smaller, a compact short-range runner with no visible identification markings, which was technically illegal on 14 separate regulations, and practically speaking was extremely common in this part of the sector. Mara Voss walked to it without hesitation. "This is yours," I said. It was not a question. "It belongs to a friend," she said, and then opened the access panel beside the bay door with a code that she also typed in from memory. But she said I could use it if things got complicated. "Things have gotten complicated," said Zenva. "They have," agreed Mara Voss, sounding satisfied rather than concerned. That was the plan. There it was. That was the sentence. That one quiet, completely unremarkable sentence, delivered while she was already moving toward the ship, that rearranged every assumption I had made since Admiral 10 had slid that file across the briefing table and told me to go get her. She had not been hiding on Prism Station. She had been working, and she had not simply agreed to come with us when we knocked on her door because she was cooperative, or because she was harmless, or because 2 bureau officers in full uniform were intimidating enough to make a retired librarian comply. She had agreed to come with us because we were part of whatever she was doing. She had been waiting for us to show up and knock. She had made exactly 3 mugs of tea. "You used us," I said. She turned halfway up the boarding ramp of the unmarked ship and gave me that warm, unhurried smile again. "I needed the Bureau involved," she said, "officially, with field officers on site, because what happens next needs to be properly documented, and documentation is, I think you will agree, rather my specialty." She reached into her bag, the one that clinked, and produced a thick folder. Printed documents, physical copies, the kind that cannot be remotely deleted, or signal blocked, or quietly erased from a server somewhere. She held it out to me. I took it. The top page read, "Evidence Dossier, Drelkan Vorathi Horan Coordinated Network, compiled by M. Voss, independent investigator, with supporting documentation from sources listed on pages 4 through 11. I turned to page 2, then page 3. Then I made the mistake of glancing at page 7, and I stopped walking and simply stood in the docking bay, holding the file, reading, because what was on those pages was the kind of information that changes the shape of a day very rapidly. "How long?" I said without looking up. 4 months on Prism Station, said Mara Voss. 14 months of background work before that. You have been investigating a coordinated criminal network across 3 major factions for 14 months. 18, if you count the preliminary research phase. She tilted her head. I was a librarian for 32 years. Research is research, Officer Kallox. The subject material is less important than the methodology. You could have come to the Bureau, said Zenva, and to her credit she did not say it accusingly. She said it the way you might note that there had been an easier road available, while standing at the destination having taken the harder one. I did, said Mara Voss. 14 months ago, I brought preliminary findings to the Bureau's regional office on Threshold Station. 3 days later, someone within that office tipped off the Drelkon syndicate that an investigation had been opened, and 2 of my sources went quiet permanently. The warmth in her voice did not disappear, but something underneath it became briefly, unmistakably cold. I decided after that to finish the work myself and deliver the completed evidence to officers I had personally vetted. You vetted us, I said. You specifically, she said. Your record is public record, Officer Kallox. 11 years, not a single disciplinary note for improper conduct. You pursued a shape-shifting arms dealer for 8 months without accepting the standard third-party contractor payment that 4 of your colleagues on that case accepted. You are, by every measurable indicator, a genuinely honest officer in a system that does not always reward that. She paused. Officer Priel, I vetted last week, when I found out who would be assigned to accompany you. She is also clean. Zenva looked like she could not decide whether to be flattered or unsettled. She appeared to be experiencing both at the same time, which, honestly, was appropriate. And if we had not been clean, I asked, then I would have made you tea, said Mara Voss, given you the wrong folder, and been on this ship before you realized the documents were recipes. She smiled. I also would not have answered the door in the first coat I picked up. That one has a tracker in the lining from a Drelkon operative who searched my unit 3 weeks ago. I made sure it went into storage before we left. She patted the coat she was wearing. This one is much better. The small alarm in the back of my head, the one that had started quietly in the corridor outside her unit, had by this point stopped being small or quiet. It had become a full, broad, deeply respectful appreciation for the fact that I had spent this entire situation believing I was the one conducting it, and I had been, in every meaningful sense, completely wrong about that. Mara Voss had run this operation from the moment we knocked on her door, possibly from the moment she arrived on Prism Station, possibly from the moment she sat down in the Bureau regional office 14 months ago and watched her information disappear and decided, with the calm practicality of someone who had spent 3 decades organizing knowledge and understanding exactly how much power that gives you, to do the whole thing herself. "The contact in the Bureau," I said, "the one you know." She reached back into her bag, produced a single sealed document, and handed it to me with the gravity of someone handing over something they had carried a long distance. "Deputy Commissioner Harold Voss," she said, and then, to the unspoken question on both my face and Zenva's, "Yes, my son-in-law. He married my daughter 11 years ago. He joined the Drelcon network 8 years ago. He has been feeding them Bureau intelligence ever since." She was quiet for one moment, just one, and in that moment something moved across her expression that was not serenity and not warmth. It was something older and heavier than either of those things. He was very good at seeming trustworthy. People who need you to trust them usually are. Nobody said anything. The gas giant Yulan Ma was visible through the bay's viewport, enormous and amber and unhurried, turning slowly in its own orbit the way large things do. "What do you need from us?" I said, because I was done pretending I was in charge of this situation and had decided that was probably fine. Mara Voss straightened. She picked up her bag. She looked at the dossier in my hands, all that printed, physical, uncorruptible evidence, and she said, "I need you to take that to the Bureau Director's office personally, not through channels, not through any regional hub, directly, by hand, today. I need you to trigger a formal Level 1 investigation before Harold realizes the arrest he ordered did not go the way he planned." "He ordered the arrest?" said Zenva. "He suggested it to Admiral 10, said Mara Voss, with the small dry smile of someone who had watched a very predictable move arrive exactly on schedule. "He thought having me officially detained would slow things down, give the network time to move their assets. Instead it moved things forward." She looked at me steadily. "Time is somewhat important now." I looked at the dossier. I looked at Zenva. I looked at Mara Voss, standing on the ramp of her friend's unmarked ship with a library book under her arm and an empty tea mug in her hand, and 18 months of meticulous, patient, extraordinarily dangerous work tucked into a printed folder. She was trusting to 2 officers she had spent the last month quietly deciding she could believe in. "Where are you going?" I asked. "To collect the last source," she said. "The one who would not trust a digital channel and would not speak to anyone they had not met in person." She glanced down at the book under her arm. "Also, I have not finished this chapter, and it seems like the kind of day where I might need something to read while I wait for things to settle." She turned and walked up the ramp. The bay door began to close behind her, and then, just before it sealed, she looked back at us over her shoulder, and for just a moment the light from Yulan Ma caught her expression at the right angle, and she did not look like a retired librarian or a cooperative civilian or a pleasant older woman who made tea for the officers who came to her door. She looked like someone who had known exactly how this day was going to end before it started. "Thank you for the escort," she said. "You were very helpful." The door sealed. The ship was gone in 40 seconds. Zenva stood beside me in the empty docking bay, and for a long time neither of us said anything. Then she looked at the dossier in my hands. Then she looked at the sealed document with Deputy Commissioner Harold Voss's name on it. Then she looked at the space where the ship had been. "Draven," she said. "Yes. She used us as a distraction." "She used us as a delivery service," I corrected. "The distraction was Harold ordering the arrest in the first place. We were the response he did not expect to his own move." Zenva thought about that. She played her son-in-law's interference against him. "She played everything against everything," I said. "For 18 months. Another silence. "She left us the evidence," said Zenva carefully. "She gave us the credit." "She does not want the credit," I said, because I understood that now, fully and without question. Mara Voss had not done any of this for recognition. She had done it because someone had to, and she was the one who knew how, and so she had simply gotten on with it in the same way she had probably gotten on with every difficult thing in her life, methodically, patiently, and with an extremely well-organized filing system. I tucked the dossier under my arm. I straightened my uniform. I looked at Zenva. "We need to get to the Bureau Director's office," I said. "By hand, today." "Understood," said Zenva. She paused. Should we call for extraction? No, I said. No channels, we go ourselves. She nodded, and then almost to herself so quietly I almost missed it. I want to be like her when I grow up. I did not say anything to that, because there was nothing to say that would have added to it. I just walked toward the bay exit, dossier in hand, moving with the particular purpose of someone who has understood, clearly and finally, that they are carrying something that matters. Behind us, Yulin Ma turned, amber and enormous and patient, the kind of thing that has seen a great many stories pass beneath it, and knows without needing to be told when it has just witnessed a good one. 3 weeks later, Deputy Commissioner Harold Voss was formally charged on 19 counts of intelligence breach, 4 counts of coordinated criminal facilitation, and 1 count that the Bureau's legal team had spent several days carefully wording, which essentially amounted to being the reason 2 informants had been silenced 18 months ago. The Drelkan Vorathi Horan network was dismantled across 4 systems, 43 arrests, 11 active operations terminated, a coordinated black market route that had been running for 6 years, gone. The credit in the official report went to Senior Intelligence Officer Draven Kallox and Officer Zenva Priel, with additional contributions from an independent source whose name, at their own request, was listed in the classified appendix and not the public record. The independent source, last confirmed location, a mid-range passenger ship somewhere past the Yulin Ma transit corridor, did not respond to the Bureau's official commendation message. She did, however, leave a short note with the station administrator at Prism Station, addressed to me. It said, "The tea was a good brand. You should have tried it." It said, below that, "Take care of Priel. She is going to be extraordinary." And at the very bottom, in the small, precise handwriting of someone who had spent a career surrounded by words and understood exactly how much weight each one carries, "They always underestimate the librarians.